Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is power, especially power and leadership, world leadership. Vladimir Putin is the quintessential example of an arrogant world leader. Everything Putin does is calculated. Everything is for a purpose, and the consequence of each action is known in advance. No move is left to chance, and no act without purpose. Spontaneity is not a part of Putin's gestalt. So when Russian Air Force planes flying off the U.S. coast rumble with U.S. planes 4 times in a single week and then again later, we need to take notice and figure out why Putin initiated that action. The Russian planes were mostly Tu-95 Bear bombers, planes that are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Also involved were Russian Il-38 patrol planes. The U.S. responded by scrambling F-22 fighter jets that were joined by Canadian CF-18 Hornets. Time and again, they escorted the Russian planes away, and each situation ended without harm or incident. The Russians claimed that their planes were close, but still in international space. The United States concedes that the Russians only actually entered their space on 1 of 4 occasions. According to an official statement issued by the Russian Defense Ministry, Russia, quote, regularly carries out patrol missions above the neutral waters of the Arctic, the Atlantic, and the Black Sea, and the Pacific Ocean. And all such missions are carried out in strict compliance with international regulations and with respect to national borders, unquote. Bear bombers are slow, cumbersome, huge planes. The Il-38 planes are also very slow-moving. They are the antithesis of the fighter jets that the U.S. sent to meet, intercept, and escort them out of the area. Red flag number 1 is that the Russians, if they were interested in serious warfare, would have sent fighter jets, not the equivalent of military leisure planes. Red flag number 2 is that the Russians engaged in this game not once, not twice, but 4 times. Russia was sending a message to the United States, and by extension to the rest of the free world. The most crucial part of the message is that Russia has a very long range and can reach deep into other areas and deep into others' areas. Russian military might is not, by any means, limited to regional conflicts. A subtext of the message, this one more directly aimed at the United States only, is that while the United States may choose to use Tomahawk missiles against Syria and deploy the mother of all bombs against terrorists in Afghanistan, we too have the capability of rallying our military might and reaching all over the world. The Russians have argued that in the U.S. airstrike against an Air Force base in Syria in retaliation for Assad's use of sarin gas on civilians, the United States violated international law. They are further arguing that the bombing will have no impact on the larger picture. In a joint press conference with the foreign ministers of both Iran and Syria, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said, quote, attempts of this kind will never be a success. It will never happen. He continued, we demand that the United States should respect the sovereignty of a state and avoid such actions that threaten the current world order, unquote. Putin is playing a game of cat and mouse. He is almost hoping that the United States will take the bait, just as the Turks did when Turkey shot down a Russian bomber last year, torpedoing relations between the nations. Pragmatically, however, he knows better. The United States did not take the bait this time, just like they did not take the bait when the Russians repeatedly buzzed the U.S. destroyer, the USS Porter, in the Black Sea and the Persian Gulf. Putin seems to be enjoying this game. He sent a similar tease along the border of the Japanese airspace in April, and much closer to home, a Russian spy ship, Viktor Leonov, has recently been spotted not once but twice off the coast of the U.S. Russia is sitting in a position of power. They invaded Crimea and major parts of Ukraine, and most of the world remained quiet. They entered the conflict in Syria and the Middle East, and are building an infrastructure in Syria that is focused on the long term. Vladimir Putin is a seasoned and experienced world leader. The new U.S. administration is still getting its sea legs. Trump and his administration has taken umbrage to Russia's actions and initiatives and said that Russia should return Crimea and exit Ukraine. They have reacted very differently to world events than did previous administrations, and Putin is sending a message back, one that he is not willing to send face-to-face in conversations or through subtle backdoor messengers. This is another way of Putin saying no way to the U.S. It's a loud, defiant niet. It is an important warning from Russia to the United States not to skirmish with us. It's a classic example of Putin's arrogance. It is no secret that Russia does not want to confront the United States. He just wants to have fun at the expense of the United States. Putin likes toying with other countries. These games and taunts are another of the games that Russia is playing. Military cat and mouse is certainly a more controlled and calculated game than Russian roulette. Now let's talk about Israel and Lebanon. The prediction is that the border between Lebanon and Israel will heat up so much this summer that Israel will be forced to respond, and the result will be a war between Hezbollah and Israel. And that explains why Hezbollah has launched a multifaceted public relations campaign to quell a potential summer war with Israel. Area residents, both Lebanese and Israeli, are worried. In an effort to placate his fellow Lebanese, and in a great display of arrogance, Sheikh Naim Qassam, the number 2 man in Hezbollah, gave an in-depth interview to Al-Khabar TV and laid out the possibility of war and his take on Israel's response. Explaining his vision, he said, quote, "All the indications point to the fact that Israel is deterred. It has not taken a decision to act in a renewed aggressive manner against Lebanon at this stage." The second in command of Hezbollah continued to explain why he thinks this is happening. He said, "It doesn't flow from its morals, but rather from its understanding that any war against Lebanon is guaranteed loss for Israel." He proudly asserted that the resistance is at the peak of its readiness. If Israel surprises, despite the political analysis, it will be foolish and reckless step. Then he concluded his analysis by saying, "The level of Hezbollah's readiness enables it to withstand any possible war, both numerically and in terms of means and goals." Hezbollah has also taken journalists on a press tour and briefing that traversed the border between Israel and Lebanon. The tour guide, showing off his understanding of Israeli Northern Command, even mentioned the name of the Israeli general in the command area. He offered his own explanation of how Israel was laying out traps for Hezbollah in the event of war, and then further explained why they will not be effective. The tour guide said, "The enemy has taken a number of measures. For the past year, he has begun to build fortifications, obstacles, and extensive means of defense that seem to stop people from moving toward it." Israel knows that Hezbollah is serious and can be a formidable enemy. They know that Hezbollah has stockpiled hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles. They know that there are serious threats and the cost to Israel would be very high. Since the last conflict with Hezbollah, which took place July 12th through August 14th in the summer of 2006, Hezbollah, which was then just a Lebanese militia, has been transformed into a serious fighting force. They have battle-ready troops with hundreds of hours of fighting experience. They know that in addition to their huge storage of rockets, Hezbollah has dug a labyrinth of tunnels deep into the ground. Hezbollah knows that Israel knows. Hezbollah also knows that Israel also knows that Hezbollah knows that a conflict will require Israeli troops to enter on the ground. And that is what Hezbollah is waiting for. When Israeli troops marched in, Hezbollah will be waiting for them with traps, just like they did in 2006, just as Hamas planned in Gaza. The cost in terms of lives, of IDF soldiers' lives, will be very high. And the potential for kidnapping Israeli soldiers will be even higher. And that is the real prize for Hezbollah. That is what Hezbollah is really after. Israel has a well-earned reputation of moving heaven and earth to bring back their soldiers. Israelis will do just about anything to trade for their bodies, alive or dead. For one of their kidnapped souls, Israel has traded hundreds, at one point over 1,000 terrorist prisoners to get back the bodies of Israeli soldiers or kidnapped soldiers. In the Middle East, wars and conflicts are often waged in the summer months. Time will tell. Coming up next, Points of View. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I wanted to discuss 3 columns today, all about the same subject. Actually, 2 are responses to the first. They're all from the New York Times. I want to focus on a column by Marwan Barghouti. Barghouti is a convicted terrorist serving multiple life sentences in Israeli prison for terror. He was the head of the Tanzim, the special terror group established to wreak horror on Israelis. Barghouti is the most popular person in Palestinian political culture despite being in prison, or maybe because he's in prison. He even rivaled Arafat in popularity when Arafat was alive. He is an anti-intellectual intellectual. He gives the image of being a down-to-earth man of the people, a worker. Never wore a tie or a suit, just a leather bomber jacket and jeans. He marched with the people. He spoke with them. He's short and stout. He's extremely articulate in Hebrew and in English. I met Barghouti while he was the head of Tanzim, the terrorist group. He was very frank and honest about where he draws the line. He said his biggest compromise is recognizing that Israel can exist within the 67 borders. He will not accept anything more than that. The New York Times printed an op-ed by Barghouti about his hunger strike and just noted that he was a political leader. This is what they noted in the blurb under the column. Quote, Marwan Barghouti is a Palestinian leader and parliamentarian, unquote. The New York Times later amended the note. The public editor took them to task. In addition, Israel wrote a response. Let's take a look at his column and then the responses. His column was published in the Sunday edition of the New York Times on April 16, 2017. The editor's note came out on the 17th. This is how Barghouti begins. Having spent the last 15 years in an Israeli prison, I have been both a witness to and a victim of Israel's illegal system of mass arbitrary arrests and ill treatment of Palestinian prisoners. After exhausting all other options, I decided there was no choice but to resist these abuses by going on a hunger strike. Barghouti is pulling at the heartstrings of New York Times readers. He's trying to say that Israel and the Israelis are monsters, where in truth he is the monster. Listen to what he says. Some 1,000 Palestinian prisoners have decided to take part in this hunger strike, which begins today, the day we observe here as Prisoners' Day. Hunger striking is the most peaceful form of resistance available. It inflicts pain solely on those who participate and on their loved ones, in the hopes that their empty stomachs and their sacrifice will help the message resonate beyond the confines of their dark cells. Now Barghouti says that when Israel defends itself against mass murdering terrorists, Israel violates international law. He says, quote, Israel, the occupying power, has violated international law in multiple ways for nearly 70 years, and yet has been granted impunity for its actions. It has committed grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions against the Palestinian people. The prisoners, including men, women, and children, are no exception. Barghouti goes on for a significant time ranting about Israel's sins and its oppression of the Palestinian. Then he concludes, Israel is not the first occupying or colonial power to resort to such expedients. Every national liberation movement in history can recall similar practices. This is why so many people who have fought against oppression, colonialism, and apartheid stand with us. The international campaign to free Marwan Barghouti and all Palestinian prisoners, that the anti-apartheid icon Ahmed Kathrada and my wife Fadwa inaugurated in 2013 from Nelson Mandela's former cell on Robben Island, has enjoyed the support of 8 Nobel Peace Prize laureates, 120 governments, and hundreds of leaders, parliamentarians, artists, and academics around the world. Their solidarity exposes Israel's moral and political failure. Rights are not bestowed by an oppressor. Freedom and dignity are universal rights that are inherent in humanity, to be enjoyed by every nation and by all human beings. Palestinians will not be an exception. Only ending occupation will end this injustice and mark the birth of peace. Barghouti was trying to bring the weight of the world against Israel and draws parallels between Israel and South African apartheid. He is flat out wrong. Because of a huge backlash, the editors added a note online Editor's note, April 17th, 2017 reads, "This article explained the writer's prison sentence, but neglected to provide sufficient context by stating the offenses of which he was convicted. There were 5 counts of murder and membership in the terrorist organization. Mr. Barghouti declined to offer a defense at his trial and refused to recognize the Israeli court's jurisdiction and legitimacy. Marwan Barghouti is a Palestinian leader and parliamentarian." That is all the note read. But Barghouti was actually responsible for at least 39 terror attacks that he coordinated and planned, as many as 90 murders. That includes the murder of Shalhavat Paz, a 10-month-old who was murdered by a Tanzim sniper while she was pushed in her baby carriage by her parents. This is not a nice man. Second up is a response by the public editor, Liz Spade. Her job is to hold the paper to task. In her response, she says that the paper made a huge error. They should do better moving forward, and that making the correction is an important start. Her piece came out the next day, on April 18th. Here's how Spade begins. Marwan Barghouti is an unusually popular political figure among Palestinians, especially for a man behind bars. He is a charismatic leader who has written 3 books, and for many years has commanded an outside presence beyond the Israeli prison, where he is serving time. He was given 5 consecutive life terms after being convicted in an Israeli criminal court of premeditated murder for his role in terrorist attacks that killed 5 people, along with other crimes. On Sunday, he wrote a piece for the op-ed pages of the New York Times to draw attention to a mass hunger strike for what he calls Israel's arbitrary arrest and poor treatment of Palestinian prisoners. She is correct. The Sunday New York Times part is essential. Sunday's paper is especially the opinion section, is read more than any other day's paper, and the opinion section is a huge component of the Sunday paper's success. The editors hemmed and hawed when she challenged them, but they did add that note, and she concludes, "This isn't a new issue for the opinion section. I have written before on the need to more fully identify the biography and the credentials of authors, especially details that help people make judgments about the opinions they're reading. Do the authors of the pieces have any conflicts of interest that could challenge their credibility? Are they who they say they are? And can editors vouch for their fidelity? I see no reason to skimp on this, while failing to do so risk the credibility of the author and the op-ed pages. In this case, I'm pleased to see the editors responding to the complaints and moving to correct the issue rather than resist it. Hopefully, it's a sign that fuller disclosure will become regular practice." Finally, we have Gilad Erdan's column, which appeared online on May 1st and was not in print as far as I could see. Erdan is Israel's Minister of Public Security and Strategic Affairs. He begins his column and lays out the numbers and the stark, scary facts of the terrorists and the hunger strikers. Democracies around the world are searching for ways to protect their citizens from the threat of terrorism. As Israel's public security minister, I hardly go a week without a foreign official turning to me to learn from our experience. For better or for worse, the thousands of attacks carried out by Palestinian terrorists against Israel have made my country a world expert in combating this threat. As a result of its counterterrorism operations, Israel now has 6,177 terrorism-related prisoners. Many of these prisoners were involved in the wave of violence initiated in September 2000 under Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader at the time, following his rejection of the American-Israeli peace offer. The terrorist campaign that began then has so far led to the murder of some 1,300 Israelis, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters, children of every faith and background. Of the 6,177 security prisoners, about 1,200 have recently begun a hunger strike. The strike leader is Marwan Barghouti, who is behind several deadly attacks. Erdan makes a clear argument that Barghouti is not innocent, and the PA incites violence and even pays the mass-murdering terrorists and their families. The West gives the PA aid so they are actually paying the terrorists too. This is how Erdan concludes. Because the Palestinian Authority's budget depends heavily on foreign aid, these payments are, for all intents and purposes, paid by taxpayers in the countries of foreign funders. While the Palestinians seem to have engaged in accounting tricks to blur the money trail, The money has now been funneled through the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The billions of dollars in international aid enable the authority to continue lining the terrorist pockets with cash. Both politicians and ordinary citizens must demand an end to this gross abuse of international funds. This is one of the most important lessons of the Israeli experience in fighting terrorism. While disrupting terrorist activity, we must also work together to combat the incitement that drives it. When Palestinian leaders cease to glorify terrorists and reward violence, security prisoners will become a thing of the past, and the viable peace will become the hope for the future. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. There are two cartoons I want to discuss today. The first is from The New Yorker and is by Jack Ziegler. Jack passed away recently and spent 30-plus years as a cartoonist for The New Yorker. His style is fanciful and his commentary was hilarious and biting at the same time. This cartoon is about America, and everyone is feeling the excessive cost of health insurance. Ziegler makes fun of it. A family is sitting around the dinner table, and the father says, "Kids, your mother and I have spent so much on health insurance this year that instead of vacation, we're all going in for elective surgery." The next cartoon is by Armand Dan Van and is entitled Muslim Dictators of the 21st Century. 4 dictators are on horseback with spears. They're trampling people underneath and stabbing them. In each of their hands is a scimitar, a Muslim sword. The 4 are Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, Assad, and Erdogan of Turkey. The cartoonist is putting the president of Turkey in the same group as the others. That is a powerful attack against the current democratically elected president of Turkey. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. Pope Francis visited Egypt recently. This was a very important visit. In Egypt, Pope Francis met with the Coptic Pope. The 2 clerics have developed a relationship. They are both called Pope, by the way, which is interesting. Pope Francis also met with other Christian leaders. But more importantly, Pope also met with one of the most significant Muslim leaders in the world, the Islamic leader, the Grand Imam and president of Al-Azhar University, arguably the most prestigious Muslim institution in the world. Everyone in the Middle East is aware of the symbiotic relationship between Muslims and Christians over the centuries in the region. But of late, there has been a rejection of Christians spearheaded by Muslim extremists like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. These extremists have called for no meetings with Christians and even the killing of Christians. This was a very successful and important trip, yet it was hardly covered in the West outside of the papal media. Speaking of the Pope, there's a reason why popes do not traditionally speak off the cuff, but Pope Francis is different. He often speaks off the cuff and speaks from his heart. And sometimes he misspeaks. That can be a problem. Most popes, in the recent past at least, spoke only by reading prepared, vetted notes. They do not repeat themselves for fear that there may be a difference between the messages, and that can cause confusion. When the Pope speaks, it's considered policy. The Pope's interpretation of Bible and religion is infallible. It's called the infallibility of the Pope. An example of what can happen did happen when the Pope said that refugees today are living in concentration camps. His exact words were, "I don't know if he managed to leave that concentration camp because refugee camps, many of them, are of concentration because of the great number of people left there inside them." The parallel is absurd. Nazis created work camps and death camps. They created murder camps where technology was created specifically in order to murder Jews. Illegal immigrants and refugees cannot be portrayed as Jews in murder camps. The Vatican is simply saying that the Pope spoke off the cuff. That is not an apology. That remark requires a real mea culpa. The Pope's comments must be explained in a proper moral, historical context. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, also known as Abu Mazen, has informed Hamas and Israel that the PA will no longer foot the bill for electricity in Gaza. Israel provides about 30% of the electricity for Gaza, and the Abbas pays for it. The payment is actually taken out of the import taxes that Israel collects at the ports of Ashdod and Haifa. If Israel was decided, by the way, to shut down the electricity in Gaza, the world would declare them war criminals and label Israel a huge abuser of human rights and would be taken to the to the court, to the Human Rights Court in The Hague. Aside from Palestinian on Palestinian cruelty, which the world seems not to care about, the real reason for initiating this action is that Abbas is creating distance between the PA and Hamas. Sure, there have been stabs at unity between the PA and Hamas, but they have always failed and will continue to fail. So why now? Why is Abbas cutting off electricity to Gaza now? Because Donald Trump's upcoming visit and imminent trip to the Middle East, during which the American president will push Bibi Netanyahu to begin talks with Abbas. By lashing out against Hamas, Abbas is signaling that he might be ready to talk to Israel. An Iranian expatriate was assassinated in Istanbul, Turkey recently. Saeed Karamian was the founder and head of a satellite television network that broadcast in Persian all over the world and was even viewed in Iran through satellite dishes and the internet. Karamian was murdered along with a colleague as they drove down the street in Istanbul. A jeep pulled up, blocked their path, then two assassins with ski masks got out, murdered Karamian and his associate. The jeep was later found and abandoned and burned. Earlier this year, Karamian was convicted in Iran in absentia and sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was convicted of acting against national security and the Islamic Republic and spreading propaganda against the Islamic Republic. The prime suspect in the death and murder of Saeed Karamian is, of course, the Iranians. We'll follow the investigation. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the word tanzim means organization in Arabic? I used it earlier to explain and describe the terror group that was headed by Barghouti. The Tanzim was created by Arafat in 1998, and Barghouti was put in charge. The purpose of the organization, the Tanzim, was to counter Islamic radicalism. In other words, radical Islam was not supposed to take hold in the PA, and people interested in anti-Israeli activities would work through the Tanzim. They literally fostered and grew their elite units and stymied and broke up Islamic radical groups. Everyone was united by their fight against Israel. Arafat was very pleased, except Barghouti was becoming very popular, and that was a challenge to Arafat, even though he groomed and appointed Barghouti, and he was also part of Arafat's inner circle. Arafat began to get jealous of Barghouti. Barghouti's public appearances were reduced, but tensions continued to rise. There was even one incident where Arafat drew his sidearm revolver in a meeting and aimed it at Barghouti. Luckily, Arafat's bodyguards always removed the bullets from the gun that he carried in his holster. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.